I worked for a political party when I was a kid, you know, at like 14, and quite intently. But
what party was it?
It was a socialist party in Canada,
Wow.
the NDP. That was back the New Democratic Party, which is part of the mainstream in Canadian politics. That was back when I would say they were a valid voice for the working class, you know. And I knew the leadership of the provincial party and the national party to some degree. I had some access because the person who was our representative was the leader of the Alberta NDP, and I knew him and his wife quite well. And they were at the upper echelons of the party, at least at that time. Those people were actually concerned with giving the working class a voice. Like it was a genuine. They were genuinely committed to that. But I noticed that the lower level party functionaries, you know, I didn't like them much, and I couldn't put my finger on it until I read George Orwell. And you know, Orwell said, he was criticizing British socialists, even though he was a socialist himself. He said, well, typical British middle-class socialist doesn't like the poor, they just hate the rich. It's like, and that was exactly the feeling I got, that this so-called sympathy, empathy, let's say, for the oppressed had a hell of a lot more to do with vengefulness and resentment with regards to anyone who was seen as having privilege. And I certainly think that that's just, and I was thinking about that the other day. I just did a talk in DC, and I was thinking about, you know, the Marxist claims to sympathy with the working class. Because you might say, well, they actually have sympathy for the working class. Are they really trying to put their positions forward, their needs forward, or do they just hate the successful, depending on how that's divided up? And I thought, well, how do you make a judgment like that? And I had this personal experience, but then I thought, well, that's easy with Marxism. It's like, you just look at all the murders, and then you know whether that was a movement that was genuinely motivated by empathy.
Right. And a lot of people die in all of this leftist
yeah,
stuff.
Like an unbelievable number, and not just members of the oppressor class, let's say, like everyone. And it happens over and over, you know, and it's really worth thinking about, because, well, when you might think, well, is that somehow embedded in the Marxist doctrine? Is it an inevitable consequence of the unfolding of these ideas? And someone like Ayn Rand, for example, would say definitely, and Solzhenitsyn made that case too in the Gulag Archipelago, but it's not self-evident. But I think there's a level underneath the ideas that you could go and say, well, what's motivating this? Is it actually like saintly compassion for the downtrodden, or is it resentment about the fact that life is unfair and tragic, which it definitely it is? Well, you know, by their fruits ye shall know them. That's the answer to that question. It's like, well, if 30, 40 million people die in the aftermath of the revolution, and a tremendous number of them are ordinary people, and that happens repeatedly, it's like, oh, well, I guess it must be resentment and hatred, because like, how else do you account for all of that?
The proof is in the pudding, so to speak.
Well, if you're not willing to accept that sort of thing as proof, you got to also ask, like, well, okay, what would you allow to falsify your theory? Like, how many corpses have to stack up before you think?
And the number is pretty high already, so
it's uncountable. You know, like, we don't know how many people died as a consequence of communist totalitarianism. It could be 50 million, it could be 150 million. Those are big error bars.
Yeah.
You know, like that's a big problem when you can't count in the tens of millions, when you can't get the damn estimate right. And it happened in multiple cultures, right? Because you might say, well, it was just specific to a time and place. It wasn't intrinsic to this radical doctrine. Yeah, well, there's not that much that's the same about the Soviet Union and all of its countries, let's say. Broad range of cultures. Maoist China, Cambodia, you know, places in Africa as well. These aren't the same places, but nonetheless, you drop that poisonous seed in there, and it's like mayhem in no time flat, and nothing works. Like, it's so I'm going for the, don't be thinking that you're so saintly just because you claim to stand for the oppressed. It's like, examine your conscience. And well,
but that thing though is a drug to people, right? I mean, that, you know, what we refer to as virtue signaling and all of that, but that feeling that you're always looking out for everyone else, you'll always sacrifice yourself for anyone else, you'll always attack the privileged and supposed people above you. It really, there's something in that has like an addictive quality,
well,
right?
the question is, what's the drug? You know, the drug might be, oh, I'm a good person, maybe, but like a more psychoanalytically minded person might say, no, that's not actually the drug. The drug is the hatred and the rationalization for the use of power and the wish for totalitarian control and tyrannical rule that the mask of virtue covers. So the virtue signaling, actually, that's not what's really providing the big kick. You know, it's like, I'm a good person. It's like, no, it's even better than this. It's like, I've got a place to direct my worst impulses. I don't even have to notice them myself because I've got this mask of virtue, and so I can let let's call them, you know, the demonic forces that make up part of the human psyche. I can let them have carte blanche and then also say that I'm virtuous. You know, I would say that.
La revolución necesita de tu ayuda. Deposita, suscríbete, comparte los videos, apórtanos en el Patreon para que podamos seguir luchando por la libertad.